board. Okay. And yeah, please stay on mute if you can as we move through. So hello, everybody. I'm JohnMichael Parker, State Representative from the 101st. Before I give an intro, let me just give us an overview. I shared this agenda this morning. You know, we have three main outcomes we're going to work on. The first one is knowledge. So making sure that we're all sort of on the same page about the issue and the proposal. We're then going to work on building community by getting to hear from folks with questions, concerns, feedback, thoughts. We have a process where we'll ask them into the chat, and then we'll call on folks to share their voices. And then our final outcome is advocacy. So as you probably know, there's already a public hearing scheduled for this bill. And so we want to give all of the insider tips on how best to prepare for that and make your voices heard in the process going forward. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. So I'm JohnMichael, as I said, and I'm the state rep from my hometown, which is Madison, and also our neighbors to the north in Durham. And I want to talk about why this is important to me. Arts have been a huge part of my life growing up through school, and of course, arts, culture, and tourism, and the things that make our community special and great and meaningful and draw people here have meant so much to me throughout my entire life living in Connecticut in the Northeast. You know, I do want to say that in my professional work, I serve as the executive director of a statewide nonprofit that does arts education called Arts for Learning Connecticut. So in some ways, this is, you know, the place where I've done most of my work, but of course, it's much broader and deeper than that as a member of this community. So we know that arts, culture, and tourism touches so many people in so many ways, everything from economic development to equity. You know, this work is a force for good in so many ways. And of course, we also know that this sector, or if we don't know yet, we'll hear from Daniel that the sector has been underfunded severely for a little while now. And we certainly know the challenges everyone is facing during COVID-19, and that the lack of funding and support has been really challenging to so many. At the same time, we've seen a little bit of encouraging support, or I should say a lot of it, from Connecticut state government. So the recent CARES Act funding that came through the arts sector and that was shared. Again, I know not everyone was able to receive that, but at least it showed a really, I think, good step in showing that this is an important sector that matters to our state. And so I think that creates some momentum. So knowing that that's happened and knowing that there's still so much more to be done, I think this is a really critical moment for us to act. I think we all know, but again, we'll hear the details of just how valuable investments in arts, culture, and tourism are in our state. So we know that the overall sector represents 15% of our state's economy, 15%. We know that every dollar invested in this sector comes back to us between 3 and 7 times. And we know that as we develop arts, culture, and tourism broadly, there are more reasons to bring people to Connecticut, bring people to our communities, and more reasons to have them stay. So, you know, what I'm excited about with this bill is that there's a chance to make a difference that impacts workforce development, make a difference that impacts economic growth more broadly, that impacts racial justice and equity, and ultimately to bring more beauty and truth and justice into the world. You know, the fact that 125 people signed up for this meeting and that now we have 88 of them here shows just how important this is to so many folks, which is inspiring and humbling, and it makes me feel even more real momentum to work on. So, you know, the last point that I'll give before I start inviting some other people into this is I just want to note that it's really important to me, and I know to many other advocates here, to bring together the arts, culture, and tourism communities. And as we move forward, we're going to do the best we can to reach out to all corners of that. If that hasn't happened yet, if you know of folks that haven't been invited into this that are in arts, culture, and tourism, please spread the word. And I'd be happy to contact folks directly and be connected with anyone that wants to share thoughts or feedback from the broad arts, culture, and tourism space. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my portion and invite a little bit of creativity into this space. Ife Michelle, would you be willing to share a few words with us?
Sure, good afternoon. I'm Aoife Michelle Gardine, creator of the Elm City Lit Fest in New Haven, and a writer, playwright, um, and got surprised this afternoon and asked to say something. So I wrote a little something based on what we're talking about today. Um, first a quote from Pauli Murray. True community is based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. It affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that bind us together. Pauli Murray is a poet scholar, was a poet and scholar. And the definition of culture is the quality in a person or society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellence in arts, letters, manners, so scholarly pursuits, etc. I wrote, arts in Connecticut represents the culture of the diverse populace who live here. Culture in Connecticut represents the diversified communities who thrive here. Arts and culture in Connecticut entwined are an essential force for the affirmation of the common human ties that bind us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Aoife and Michelle, for those words and bringing that into our meeting today. I also want to acknowledge a few people at the start, some of my legislative colleagues. So the faces that I've seen, and when I say your name, if you want to wave or say hello, just so that we can see your face pop up, feel free to do that. Quick reminder to everybody to please go on mute when you enter so that we can keep this moving. So I know that my colleague Frank Smith from Milford is here, Representative Frank Smith. I know that my colleague Jen Leeper from Fairfield State Rep is here. State Rep Robin Comey from Branford is here. And while I don't know if I've seen their faces because we've got 4 pages of Brady Bunch here, I know that Representative Amy Berger-Javallo from Ridgefield has expressed support, Rep Josh Elliott from Hamden, Rep Christine Goupil from Clinton, and of course, Senator Paul Formica, who is the founder of the Arts, Culture, and Tourism Caucus in the legislature, and who's been doing so much leadership on this for a long time that we're grateful for. So thank you to my colleagues for being here to learn about this issue and to listen to these important constituents. And I also want to now invite a few other statewide leaders to share a few thoughts just to sort of give us some context. So first, is Jason Mancini from Connecticut Humanities here?
JohnMichael, hi everybody. Thanks for leading this charge. Very grateful. I'm the executive director of Connecticut Humanities. I'd like to just maybe riff on Aoife Michelle's human ties to talk about humanities. We are the state affiliate for the National Endowment for the Humanities and work very closely as a partner and sibling organization to the Office of the Arts in Connecticut. So we are, along with the Office of the Arts, the principal statewide grant makers. We've recently been awarded $1.5 million from the Connecticut CARES Act and re-granted all of that funding to 50 of the larger museums across the state. We also had an additional $500,000 we awarded to smaller organizations with the initial round of CARES Act funding. Our focus has really been on placemaking, civic engagement, digital projects, and a range of exhibits. I think I've used up my 60 seconds, so thanks so much, JohnMichael.
Thank you, Jason. Is Brett Thompson from Connecticut Arts Alliance here? Brett, if you are, you might be on mute, or maybe we will move.
How's that? There we go.
There we go.
I'm here. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for bringing all these people together. And thank you for HB 6119. I'm the executive director of Connecticut Arts Alliance. We're a statewide membership organization that advocates for the arts in Connecticut. We work with a number of statewide partners like Jason at Connecticut Humanities, the Office of the Arts, the 9 regional service organizations, the Connecticut Arts Educator Association, and of course, the legislature itself. Some of our recent projects were Create the Vote. As the election was coming up, we engaged candidates in talking about the arts. And right now we have the Art is Part Connecticut campaign going on that gives people the resources they need to advocate for the arts, like HB 6119. We encourage people to visit our website, become a member, join us, sign up for our advocacy alerts, and look at our advocacy resources. Obviously, this bill and the contents of it are high priorities for us. It's something that our membership is definitely behind. And again, thanks for bringing it up. And we look forward to making it a pass. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brett.
Yeah.
And one more statewide voice here, Julia Wilcox from the Nonprofit Alliance. Do you want to share a few words?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, and thank you, JohnMichael. I'm Julia Wilcox, Manager of Advocacy and Public Policy for the Connecticut Community Nonprofit Alliance. The Alliance is the largest statewide association dedicated exclusively to nonprofits, and our membership represents all aspects of the sector from health and human services to social justice and beyond. And one of the primary areas of focus for me is our arts and culture division, of which I see so many of our members on the call here today. For me and in the work that we do, it is always exciting to me to see how the arts and culture, arts and culture intersects with every single one of our members, every subsector in so many incredible ways. And I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation, JohnMichael. And first and foremost, I do want to just express our appreciation to you for your vision and for your commitment to ensuring that the arts and culture sector in Connecticut really remains sustainable through both the funding mechanisms and the other aspects of the bill that you put forward. This is huge. This is a very big deal. And we feel more than anything that right now the time is right. You know, as you mentioned, we have that amazing momentum from the 40 plus legislators, and thank you to those on the call who have committed to making arts and culture a priority, and sort of right out of the gate in that initial meeting of a basic commitment to funding. And this is huge. And for us, the other aspect of this is that we also have a fiscal climate that is more positive than it's been in years. And as for folks who receive the information from the Alliance, we've included in our legislative priorities the very simple statement that if not now, when? And the arts and culture sector is absolutely included in that. So again, just thank you so much for all you do. And I so appreciate being here.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your kind words. I am simply picking up the baton from people that have worked on this for a long, long time. And with that, the perfect transition to my friend Daniel from New Haven, who is going to talk about some of the information. We're now in section 2 of our agenda, I guess, which is about knowledge. So Daniel, would you give us some knowledge and some context and some of the details? I'll pull up the slide deck as you start talking.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Daniel from the Arts Council of Greater New Haven. And yes, my challenge today is to give you the knowledge you need so that you can make a case. And I mean that by make a case in your letter that you might write to testify, make a case to other folks in your organization so that you have a really clear understanding of how you are connected to this bill, 6119, via the Tourism Fund. You can keep going till you get to the knowledge one. And I would say just at the outset, this is different than it was even 5 years ago. So the existence of this tourism fund is relatively new. Go to the next slide, JohnMichael. So this is where we're at right now for arts, culture, and tourism funding. And I'm gonna caveat that right now, which is to say we're gonna get to COVID in a second. So to start with, if you stay at a hotel, a bed and breakfast, or some kind of online Airbnb place, you will pay something called the hotel occupancy tax. That brings in about $110 million a year. For a very long time, this went right into the general fund. And if you're not familiar with the general fund, it's basically like the state's checking account. They pay for everything out of the general fund, more or less. More recently, in the last 4 years, the state created the tourism fund, which you might think of more like a savings account. So it's this protected fund separate from the general fund that invests in, the way I talk about it, at least, it kind of invests in the Connecticut experience, arts, culture, tourism. This is what makes Connecticut, Connecticut. The state has then earmarked 10% of the hotel occupancy tax into the tourism fund every year. And it's really been working. It's created stable, consistent funding for these industries over the last couple of years, which is important. That is what we've been asking for, was stable, consistent funding. That's been about somewhere between 11 and $13 million a year into arts and culture and into tourism. Keep going. Thank you. And then COVID happened. You remember that a year ago? So I put this chart together, and I know JohnMichael will share this after. I see that question, already answered it. We'll share this slide deck because I linked up some of the data here for you. So the two red bars on the right here, fiscal year 20, and an estimate that I've created for fiscal year 21 based on the trajectory. Occupancy tax has greatly decreased, but you can see in the purple lines how consistent occupancy tax is and why that is good for the tourism fund and for our industries. The issue is that the Office of Policy and Management estimates that combined between these 2 years, the fund will probably be short $14 million by June, which is a significant amount. Keep going, JohnMichael. So this bill 6119 does three things. The first is it simply renames the tourism fund to something a little more appropriate, which is the Arts, Culture, and Tourism Fund. So that matches the investment, that matches the caucus for the Arts, Culture, and Tourism Caucus. It's pretty clear, and I do think that's important, even though it might seem kind of minute. You know, it's for a legislator, getting right to the point is really helpful. It also will put into law the split between arts and culture and tourism, the way it currently is divided. So currently about 40% of the investment goes to arts and culture and 60% goes to tourism, but that has never been legislated. So this will formally legislate that distinction. And then most importantly, it increases the allocation of this hotel occupancy tax from 10% to 25%. So this chart here speaks to a normal year, and there will be normal years. So in a normal year, it brings another $20 million into the fund, which brings us in the arts and culture sector to 13 million and brings the tourism sector up to 20 million. More or less, that brings us to pre-recession levels. That has been a collective effort amongst these industries to say, bring us back to where we were before the Great Recession. And I love Julia's point, you know, if not now, when? I hope that this doesn't feel depressing, but rather it actually feels exciting, because if you flip to the next slide, JohnMichael, it's a smaller ask today because of the issue with the lodging tax. So it will end up it will refill the fund for right now, which is critically important for the next budget year. And over time, it will bring us back to pre-recession levels. So it's a smaller ask today for sustainability down the road. Process-wise, as JohnMichael suggested, going back a little bit, these recommendations have been pretty well vetted. So the Governor's Transition Committee for Arts, Culture, and Tourism, some of them are pictured here, as well as the Blue Ribbon Commission on Tourism in 2018, put these improvements together. A similar bill last year got through some of the process, but didn't ultimately pass. And two other process points. One is that the governor's budget for 22 and 23 is probably dropping on Tuesday. So that's something to be watching for. But the pivot to sort of action right now is this public hearing that has just been scheduled for the bill 6119 with the Commerce Committee, which is this Thursday at 10. And if we maintain momentum, which we'll get to next, you know, we will be able to get that through the Commerce Committee onto the Finance Committee, and it could go onto the floor before the session ends in May. And if I didn't confuse you, then, you know, I hasten to think you wouldn't have questions, but this is the chance to throw some questions out there.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you for that,
Daniel.
Daniel. I am going to see if folks would be willing to drop questions into the chat or maybe raise your hand, then we can try to facilitate this. With 98 people, we know it can get a little unruly. So Daniel's going to monitor the chat.
Now, why is this not doing?
Raise their hand and we can go from there. So I think I see Senator Ed Meyer. Go ahead, sir. You're on mute, Ed. Hey, Ed, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Can you come off mute? Not yet. I don't think I can do it. Okay, we're going to move on for a second while you play around with that. Susan, did I hear it? Susan Pleiner, did you have a question or a comment?
No.
Oh, okay, great.
I see Lisa Dent, JohnMichael. I'm not going in any order, but could you unmute Lisa and go ask it out loud?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. I was wondering if you could remind us of the Connecticut organizations that have access to the fund for distribution.
Yes, so we didn't speak them all out loud to stay on time, but a couple of important pieces would be for arts and culture. That is the funding that's legislatively appropriated for the Office of the Arts and Connecticut Humanities and the associated arts line items. For tourism, it goes to the statewide tourism marketing account and to associated tourism line items. So in short, almost everyone, individual, in some way over that spectrum of things, individual artists, community organizations, arts education groups, there's a pretty big ecosystem of support and investment in those categories.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Lisa. Does anyone else have a question or a comment that they would like to share? Chris Tracy, I see you. Go ahead, sir.
Unmuted there. I'd mentioned it in the post. I go back to Ed Meyer, Senator Meyer's election, and the fellow that he replaced up in Hartford, whose wife helped John Rowland create this amalgam of agencies. And I wonder if there's any vision as a longer term toward creating individual advocacies in Hartford where they're each funded sufficiently. I know this is a first step. I'm just asking, are we looking for a longer term on this?
I appreciate you asking that, Christopher. I can give a quick thought, and Daniel, please feel free to as well. The short answer is that we're going to keep working on it. I can say I've already been having conversations with some of my colleagues. I'll name specifically Senator Heather Summers, who has been a big supporter of this area and has a lot of ideas that she's been working on in terms of strengthening the statewide force for arts, culture, and tourism, whether it's an office in a new way, or maybe there's someone that's looking at this more broadly in the governor's office. I think most importantly from what you said is this is the next step. And as we build more resources into this broad community that supports hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and through them, individuals, artists, businesses, organizations, and really our whole state, as we see from the investment numbers, we think this is going to help us move in that path. Daniel, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Of course. It's a really good question, Chris, and I would just share that so Connecticut used to have an independent commission in the arts, and it has since become part of economic development. And I kind of misspoke because it's really part of the Department of Economic and Community Development. And we're one of about 8 states in the country that has it like that. So we're not a total outlier in that regard. It is the only state, though, that includes the word community in that as well. And I think that's maybe something we could continue to underscore, that it's not just economic, but it's also community development as well. I just put a little deck together too, Michael. So JohnMichael, so I'm going to put Mandy and then Eric and then Peter.
Go ahead.
Hi. I think this is really, really great, really promising, and I'm looking forward to submitting testimony. I just had a question about, at the beginning, Representative, you mentioned how this impacts racial justice and equity. And I just wanted to get a sense of, what that looks like in this bill, and whether there's the opportunity down the road to, as we're talking about writing language that designates how the funds are spent, whether there's the opportunity to have language that says a certain percentage is designated for arts organizations and projects that directly serve communities of color and underrepresented communities.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Mandy, and for the work that you do with your organization. I'll tell you first, what I was speaking from in my mind, and again, this is in some ways informed by what my experience has been like in this sector, knowing all of the great work that the Connecticut Office of the Arts does to support equity through their funding and overall programs. So the development of the READY framework, the inclusion in their grant processes, the many programs they run, thinking for artists and artists of color organizations led by people of color. I also think of Daniel's work and his colleagues at the New Haven at the Arts Council, and for instance, specific funds that I know have been created even this year, looking at specific communities. So the first thing that comes to mind is supporting a sector that is already, and specific statewide organizations that are already doing so much in the work of equity. And of course, there can always be more done. And I look forward to being a part of the process to move forward even further. To your question, Mandy, about maybe legislating more specifically what funding might look like, I'd be happy to have that conversation and to bring that question back. I haven't yet had a thought or response on that, but I think it's interesting. And there is certainly a big open question about, which I'm sure many of you are thinking about, what happens next, what happens with this funding. And again, that feels like it's maybe the next step on this journey. Who is next on deck, Daniel?
Eric, I believe.
I'm Eric Gom in the music department at Trinity College. Thank you very much for supporting this important work. One of the questions I had was there a particular reason why the bill was not passed in 2019? And then also looking ahead to Thursday's meeting, is there anything that we can do to offer support for that coming up next week?
Daniel, do you want to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. This is my colleagues who were working on this back then will start chuckling, and we were talking about it earlier. This is the first time we've really had a clean bill from the beginning for this. So what happened last year was that it actually was, there was not a lot of, the original bill that you're describing was actually about something else. And then when they went to write the bill, they put all of these recommendations into the bill, which does sometimes happen, but it just meant we weren't able to organize around it in quite as much time. So I do think this time we're giving ourselves, we have enough room and we have enough time to do it. We also, some of these are not a sprint, they're a marathon, right? So we're at some point in that marathon where we're building more support and momentum. I would argue a call like this, at that time wouldn't have generated this much attendance or interest. And so I think this is a step in the right direction. I put one more person on deck. Right?
I think it was me, Daniel. It
is.
Peter.
JohnMichael, thank you so much for putting this together, and thank you to all the other legislators that have supported this. I was part of the Blue Ribbon panel back in 2018, and we thought we had something really solid going there, and sadly, it did not pass. That was more about tourism, but it was also about arts and culture. And so I think part of my question is how can we support this? But I guess the answer to that is to testify in behalf of it. It's interesting that we should be having this conversation today because Rob Krett, who's on the phone call today, and I were just talking yesterday, and we've had discussions with Tom Lohman down at the Wadsworth about how we can do exactly what this bill is looking to accomplish. One of the things that I would suggest is that not only should we be testifying, but the vast treasure trove of experience and influence that rests in our boards of trustees, we should be going out to our boards too. There's some incredibly influential people across the state who reside on our boards of trustees, and that's a great way to help sway this. But if there are key legislators that it would be good to reach out to, I'd love to have some sort of a list of them. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Peter. We're going to get to, oh, there we go, Ed. Peter, we're going to get to the advocacy in about 10 minutes or so. So we'll try to lay out some of those steps. But as we keep fielding questions and comments, Senator Meyer, go ahead.
JohnMichael, can you hear me now?
Yes, happily.
Good. Thank you for your initiative here. You know, the history of the tourism and the arts is very bad. Back in 2005, 2006, Governor Rell actually took out all the money from the state budget. And we've gotten it back now, and that's a good thing. We are concerned at the same time about how you define the arts in your bill. For example, the Federal CARES Act has a section for the arts, but the definition is commercial and large. It's big arts. The Schubert does great. New Haven Symphony does great. The museums do great. But smaller promoting arts organizations, as for example, the Shoreline Arts Alliance, of which I'm a director, does not get anything. And so we're really urging your attention to that. And also looking at the bill that the co-chairs of the Appropriations Committee have now offered, which is a $461 million funding for the nonprofit sector. And you know, that bill and JohnMichael, your bill probably will be consolidated in some fashion. And you know, do take note of that, of the co-chair's bill, because it's gonna probably go. I think it's got the governor's approval on it, and it's a very exciting step for Connecticut.
Thank you for your questions and comments, Ed. I will briefly say, I think some of the orgs you referenced may have representation here today, and I imagine they would all say, you know, we feel like we're getting some support and we wish we had more support. So I want to just name that I think this is an issue that the idea of expanding this fund 1.5x will have a broad impact on lots of organizations. To the question about how to define the arts, again, I'll go back to thinking about, for instance, the Connecticut Office of the Arts, which is not only supporting organizations that are doing big entertainment. I don't know exactly what the words you use were, but thinking about the small community organizations that, you know, I don't know if I mentioned at the outset here, the director of Connecticut Office of the Arts, Liz, I had a conversation with her, you know, yesterday and often, and she was saying about how much work that organization is doing to re-grant to smaller organizations, really looking for folks across the state that are in this sector that are doing important work and maybe not seen yet. So again, as we sort of figure out the appropriation side of all this, there's more work to be done to think about how to ensure it's equitable and broad. And so I appreciate you bringing up the concern and think it's something that we can address as we figure out what to do. And then to your other point, Ed, thanks for mentioning the appropriations bill. We'll see how that connects. And I'm sure, I see Julia shaking her head. I'm sure our friends at the Nonprofit Alliance have some thoughts how we sync up. So I think Daniel had said next up is Aaron Markovich. Is Aaron here?
Gotta find my unmute.
Hi, Aaron.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to just say a few words. I'm the new guy on the scene. I'm the new executive director of Connecticut Landmarks. So I get to rabble rouse since I don't know the lay of the land as closely as everybody else. But I'm used to, I'm coming from Maryland after 10 years there, and Maryland had a specific fund that was set for heritage tourism that specifically was targeted to really improving the visitor experience in many ways. And so that's something I wanted to put out there is that I was sort of surprised with the richness and the complexity of Connecticut's history and the really great things. We own one of the sites in East Haddam, that's the Palmer Warner House that actually has an LGBTQ relationship to it. And, you know, there's just some really amazing stories. And it just doesn't feel like the tourism angle for the heritage field is as strong. It feels like the arts folks really have advocated very well for themselves. And I congratulate you on that. But the heritage side is a little bit on the weaker side. So I'd love to see anything that could happen, and I'm happy to pitch in and help out wherever I can on that. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I would be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you to learn more and see what we can bring into this. I'm going to say that a few more times throughout this meeting. I'd be happy to have follow-up conversations for folks that want to learn more or ask more or share more. So I'll be giving my contact information. I'm briefly going to respond to a few things that have come up in the chat. So first, the idea of thinking about the funding and where the funding is coming from. So as Daniel said, at this point, 10% of the tax goes into the tourism fund and the other 90 is going into the general fund. So if we were able to get an additional 15% of that tax into the newly named Arts, Culture, and Tourism Fund, there wouldn't be a direct impact of specific other organizations that are losing funding. Of course, yes, there's a $20 million impact on the overall $1 billion plus general fund, but there is this isn't we're taking away from someone else directly. So I hope that's encouraging. There have been questions about making sure individual artists are well represented and a desire to really think about that community. And I really respect and appreciate that. And I think one of the best ways, as we'll talk about in a second, is in the immediate term is getting artists in front of the committee next week to testify, so we can talk more about that. And let's see, Martha Lewis, would you like to share a question or a comment?
Hi. Yeah, well, you kind of already mentioned it. I really would like to see the money go to artists, and I also agree with Ed and I think Candy in the comment feed talking about gig workers and smaller organizations, things that aren't symphonies or don't have the most kind of obvious appeal. And it's hard not to love symphonies and big organizations that also work with, lots of children and all kinds of other things. But if you don't have artists able to live in your communities, you don't have that kind of cultural soup that allows things to happen. And I would really like to make sure that the projects are artist driven, that artists come up with things rather than arts organizations saying, we want you to come up with murals having to do with, community togetherness. Like, I think artists should be the ones deciding these kinds of things. And I'm really hoping that there's a way of making sure that we directly get it. And I really appreciate the fact that the community development part of this is being put in the forefront and that it's being moved a little bit away from tourism. I would invite everybody to think about the ways that the arts have made COVID and lockdown actually survivable. And these are really sort of intangible things, but they're really important. So everybody's been cooking and watching how-to videos and crafting and doing whatever. And in terms of what art is, I go with Brian Eno's take on what art is. And art is anything you don't have to do. So it's an elaboration. We all have to eat, but we don't have to make beef bourguignon, right? So I like a broad approach about what art would be. Thank you anyway.
Thank you.
About this.
Points taken. And to touch on a little bit of what you said, I really believe that the stronger, broader coalition we can build, the more success we'll have. And so bringing along the maybe quote larger arts institutions, symphonies and otherwise, bringing along the tourism folks and realizing that we can all be in this fund together, and that expansion is really helpful. And again, then ensuring that when we're looking at how that money gets spent, I will again reference, knowing that the great work Connecticut Office of the Arts does, and I'm confident that Connecticut Humanities and the Tourism Coalition, are in that same direction. And so I definitely think something we will continue to do and think about as we move forward. I'll mention one more point, then hand it to Daniel to talk about some next steps. There was a question about the bipartisan nature of this. If you looked at the bill now, I believe you'd see 4 co-sponsors who I think are all Democrats, but that shouldn't suggest that this is a partisan issue. There is broad bipartisan support. I've talked to folks from across, I happen to be Democrat, I've talked from folks across the aisle who are eager to support and co-sponsor. And again, I think in terms of the broader coalition and actually getting this moved forward, the more that we can have a variety of legislators co-sponsoring is helpful. So Daniel is going to tell us about how we can make that happen. Go ahead, sir.
While you transition to the screen share, I'll just offer a sort of continued answer to that question about like what is a hotel occupancy tax and why do we pay it? I would just say one thing is that, almost every state has a hotel occupancy tax of some amount. The thing that's very different and problematic about Connecticut is that we don't have that at the county or at the local city or town level. So in a lot of communities, an artist or an organization would actually have access to some other revenue coming from their local city or town. So the statewide investment in arts and culture and tourism really is essential that it comes from the state and at a high level. Like, we need to outcompete our neighbors who have local taxation in their communities. Perfect timing. And actually, y'all just did such a good job, and like, we basically out loud just created your testimony. And testimony is a fancy way of saying an email or letters or a note on your letterhead, what have you. So there is going to be a hearing with the Commerce Committee this Thursday at 10 a.m. There's very straightforward. You write a note that really speaks from your perspective about this, right? Let them know who you are, where you live or where you work, and why this bill matters to you. I would also add, what has COVID's impact been on you or your organization or your community, right? Put all the fire in there. And then again, you could send that into that email address. That's cetestimony@cga.ct.gov. And it really, it's as simple as just writing an email, and they'll post them all up on the website. I already know there's a bunch in there, so we've already exceeded the testimony that went in on the bill last time. You also can register to testify live, which is all happening remotely on this beautiful platform we've come to know called Zoom. That's the link there. You'll get it when you get the presentation. You just register there. They will submit the schedule that day at 9 a.m. So you'll know when to tune in and to what link. I would say contacting your legislators is just like an extra bonus step, and it's not hard to go after that. Once you've written your testimony, just CC or BCC all of your local legislators. They want to know that this is something that matters to you. It might get them excited about co-sponsoring it. It just might get them to know who you are and what you're all about. And there's a link there where you could look them up. And I would underscore again, where you live, where you work. Both of those are helpful as far as thinking about it. So I don't live in the same town that I work, so I have two sets of legislators that I can reach out to communicate that. And I don't know, JohnMichael, you're the legislator, so anything to underscore about what you'd be looking for if this wasn't your bill and you were reading this as an elected official?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'll speak from my perspective and also informed by some conversations I've had with colleagues, including, I will also say, Representative Caroline Simmons, who is the chair of Commerce and is looking forward to hearing from all of you. I think the simple way to say it is being personal, and as you are here because you are in an industry where communication is critical. And so I know you all are very good at that. So whatever you do to share personal, authentic, passionate communication, that's what's going to stick out. We get dozens of foreign emails all day from every issue you could imagine. And at some point, those might start to lose their zing. So if you can be specific and share from the heart, that's incredibly helpful. And even if you can pick up the phone and call your legislators, it might be intimidating, but we're just a bunch of normal folks, and having that personal conversation is going to be really helpful. To that point, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Senator Formica, who is here, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there, thank you.
Yeah, I just took me a minute to get unmuted here. I just want to thank you for all your advocacy and your work on this and moving this forward. And I thought it might be helpful just to get a little bit of a history lesson on some of the. I came in late and I apologize for that, but a meeting ran over. One, certainly contact your legislator. That's a given. Even an email or a copy of your testimony would be important that you're sending so that they have an opportunity, if they're testifying, to use some real examples. Years ago, when I first got to the Senate in 2015, there was no tourism fund. It was at the whim of DECD, and if you go back to Governor Rell, it was the tourism budget was down to $1. Governor Malloy brought it up to 5 million and then brought it back down. So as I begin to start the tourism caucus, the idea was to create awareness in this industry. And in the budget, there were two tranches. One, to someone's point about support to artists, there was a laundry list of venues and organizations that the budget supported. And the other side, there was monies that was set for statewide marketing and other forms of outside advertising. And those were two separate issues. And in order to get this money out of the hotel tax, 10%, we had to combine them together and take the money out of one pool. But it was going to be enough to equal to or better than the monies that combined previous. So we took that deal because we wanted to get started. The idea of this fund has always been, from my perspective, as a co-chair of the caucus and a member of the Appropriations Committee, a former co-chair of the Appropriations Committee when the Senate was tied, is to grow this fund to $25 or $30 million over time. But remember, in 2015, 16, 17, the deficit ran in the multiple billions of dollars. And there wasn't a lot of appetite, even though we made the case that for every dollar we spent here, we generated 3. This was an investment, not an expense. And so we began to grow the fund, 13, 14, $15 million. And when East Windsor was passed in legislation, I was able to get in that legislation 10% of table games from the East Windsor Casino, whenever it opened, would go to the tourism fund, which we estimated to be another $3 to $8 million, depending on the volume. So we're trying in every way that we can to grow this fund. And then, of course, recession, pandemic hit, and it devastated the mechanism by which we're funding tourism. So, we need to rebuild that. So even if this bill passes at 25%, we're going to need to find some money for a shot in the arm to raise this number back to where it was in the last few years, because hotels aren't generated. Working with Wendy Burry and the arts and culture folks, we were cognizant that tourism is just the action of getting people to come visit. Arts, culture, and attractions are the reason that they're going to stay here and the reason that they're going to come back. So it was a no-brainer to change the name to the Arts, Culture, and Tourism. It made some sense because we were getting some things. At that time, the speaker, Era Simowitz, also convened the Blue Ribbon Commission on Tourism. I felt like the awareness was growing. I think it became apparent at the initial caucus meeting we had in this session last week or the week before. We had 50 to 60 legislators come on the Zoom call, all excited, all with their eyes wide and their smiles great when they described those tourism, arts, and culture and attractions in their districts. And that's what we're trying to push for. So as we move the caucus forward, we're going to continue to engage the legislators. Zoom is going to make it easier for us because the next caucus, we're going to have Zoom from different arts, culture, and tourism points, arts, culture, and attraction points in other districts. So that legislators, I may be from the Guard Arts, somebody may be from, Waterbury, someone may be from wherever. And so that we can begin the process of understanding better the nuts and bolts of what's happening in each community. Because that's what it's about. It's about raising awareness. And that's what everybody can do here by telling your story, by telling the impact, and by having other legislators who are just looking at dollars and cents and may not understand the impact, know that it's a human feeling and that we are not coming out of the recession without a feel-good Connecticut. I was on the Zoom earlier with Wadsworth Atheneum today, and they talked about the arts trail that they have. We're gonna have them on, so it's a long-term play is what I'm trying to say. We're making incremental progress, and I appreciate, JohnMichael, the shot in the arm that you're giving everybody and the encouragement that you're generating to really get this going. And my last point will be about the cosigns. I think a lot of people are hesitant to co-sign a bill in its initial form because you're never sure what the language is going to be at the end. And so sometimes you could get caught by, the unintended consequences of some language that might put in there that may not have anything to do with what the bill started with, 25% versus 10. So I think people are hesitant, but I certainly plan on co-signing the bill before it gets to public hearing, and I will do my best to push the increase in this fund, which, as things move, now we're looking at a potential surplus for this fiscal year's budget, the way the economy is coming back. And I believe that this economy is in much better shape than that of the Great Recession. So when consumer confidence comes back, when vaccines starts taking hold, when the numbers start going down and people start going out, I think this economy is going to skyrocket much quicker than we imagine. And I think people need to be ready for that, because it's going to take some people by surprise, in which case it will grow our fund, it will grow our state, and it will support each and every one of you that worked so hard to make this state the great state that it is. So thank you for the opportunity to jump in a little bit.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for your work and your leadership, and for being here with us on this. I'm so grateful and inspired. Someone had asked before about who, if they wanted to be specific about other legislators. I'm just dropping in the link, the Commerce Committee. So if you want to take a look at the chairs and the co-chairs and the vice chairs, those could be people you could additionally reach out to. But I think the most important thing you can do is to share written testimony by emailing, to register to sign up and join the public hearing and give your testimony over Zoom. That'll be very powerful. And then to loop in your legislators who work for you. On that note, I'm going to ask one of those legislators, my friend Jen Leeper from Fairfield, to just share a few thoughts as we get ready to wrap up here.
Hi, Rep. Parker. This is so exciting to see so many people on this call. And I'm very aware that it is 4:54 on a Friday, so I'll be very brief. I serve on the Commerce Committee and am thrilled to be one of the co-chairs on the Main Street Working Group, a group that is really committed to redeveloping and investing in our community's main streets. And I'm just very excited about how this work can dovetail so nicely with bringing culture and art back to our public spaces and our main streets. And I know that's been a part of the work of the Main Street Center for quite a long time, but I think this could breathe a whole lot of new life into that. And when we're done with COVID, getting lots of folks back into our main streets, and that this is also an economic issue and great for small businesses. So it's really a win all around. And thank you for the work you're doing on this important issue.
Thank you, Representative Leeper. Folks, we're going to wrap this up a few minutes early here. I want to just close by thanking everyone who took the time to be here today, helped spread the word to get folks onto this call. I was blown away by the fact that we, and I want to give a special thanks to Daniel and to David Green, and of course to Brett, who I talked to about a week ago and said, hey, should we do this? It got out on a few lists, and next thing you know, we have a meeting with 100 folks on it. So thankful and inspired by the activation of the community that's out there. And I think if some of us can show up next week at this public hearing and continue this, it's going to make a big, big difference. So I thank you all. We're going to, Daniel put the link in for the deck. When I follow up with an email, I can send a PDF of that also. And in there, you'll see all the links that we discussed, as well as my contact information. You're getting it from my email anyway, so reach back out to me if you've got questions there. You know, we also will have the recording of this available if that needs to be shared. So maybe Daniel and I can figure out a way to do that for anyone that wants to follow up. So I thank you all. I hope you have a lovely, lovely weekend. And I look forward to seeing you all next week on Thursday. Bye, folks.